So in 2004, my family moved to Northern Australia. And until then, I had worked primarily with natural resources management. This was my first time working with an Indigenous group. And therefore, it was really a journey of discovery, them discovering me and me discovering them. And I think it was quite useful that we were mutually curious of each other. And so at the first meeting I went to attend, one of the old ladies there said to me, "Oh, you know, it's rather funny how the Australian government has gone to import you all the way from Africa to do research here. Does that mean we can also do it?" And I found it really amazing and interesting because I didn't really know the backstory to how Aboriginal people and researchers in general have been working before. And so I thought she was just joking with me, but it turns out that there's a lot of resentment and unhappiness among Aboriginal people in how outsiders come and participate in the knowledge field. Essentially, they feel that they are either left out or that they are used as GPSs in the process and they never really participate meaningfully in research. And then for me, coming with the background of participatory research in Southern Africa, it was really exciting for me because then I thought, well, you know, how come no one has done this before? How come no one has worked with participatory tools? Because then people can be integrated in the processes and they can feel valued in the knowledge field. So that was the sort of entry point that I thought would be interesting for them. And initially, because they requested it, it was really very much a grassroots driven relationship rather than that I told them, oh, you must learn this or you must learn this. They sort of asked questions. And then I said, well, to do that one, we would need to do this or to use this tool. Do you want to try it? And then we would try it together. And through that trial, we developed the tool. And when I say we developed the tool, for example, when we talked about key interviews, we talked about it being an involved process. And I was trying with a very long butcher's paper to explain what a good key interview was. And eventually one of the old people put up their hand and said, Bev, can I try to explain this for you? And I said, oh, yeah, go ahead. And they said, well, it's like digging for a long yam. And I go, oh, okay. And he said, well, when you're digging for a long yam in the bush, the ground is very hard. And we have these very basic tools to dig a long yam. And so you have to dig around the yam very slowly and very carefully if you want to bring out the yam without any damage. And this could take a long time, they said. It can take you, you know, maybe half a day or something like that, but it takes a very long time. So that interview that you're talking about, that's like digging for that long yam. And I went, oh, yes, perfect. That's really describing exactly what I was trying to say that you must do. So in the Dilly Bag, in the manual, we actually use those examples where they have actually explained to me how they understand something that I was trying to teach them. And in that way, they've started to see it more clearly, how some of the things that they do every day are really part of this process of finding out stuff or finding out the story and really getting a valid story out of a situation. And if you've had the chance to look at the Dilly Bag, you see the language there is very much the language they use every day. So it's not perfect English. And a lot of the imagery is imagery on the ground when you live on the ground. But it's not confined to only Aboriginal people. Anyone who is interested in participatory research and wants to work in a remote setting where they're interacting with Aboriginal people, then they can use the Dilly Bag. Essentially, it's actually quite important that, or useful that they look at the Dilly Bag before they go, because then they can begin to understand how Indigenous people understand participation, for example, how they understand knowledge and sampling, and how they understand bias, because we try to unpack some of those key terms in the Dilly Bag. Participatory research is really an approach to research that is changing the way that researchers think about extracting knowledge, think about valuing that knowledge, and think about also unpacking that knowledge. It really requires a mindset change from researchers thinking they own the process and they are superior in the process to a state where the researcher is equal to the people that they are working with, and it's a collaborative relationship where the information gathered is checked with the people that you're gathering it from, and that you don't have ownership of the information or the rights, the sole rights to the relationship, to the information that you gather. So in many ways, it's more than the tools. It's a way of doing stuff. It's a way of thinking. In ARPNet, we've simplified it in this following way. It's knowing when to do the research in the right way, with the right people, at the right time, in the right places, and also using the right tools. So the tools come into it, but they are only a small part of all the other things that must come into play before you do the research. And then the tools themselves, as I said, we've developed the tools. We've tried to apply the tools in the way that I was trained to apply the tools. And when that really didn't work, then we worked out how to adjust the tools so that they would work in an Aboriginal setting. And when I say that, I guess it's an example of that is the cultural mapping. We realized early on that cultural mapping is a very difficult exercise to do in an Aboriginal setting, because in the communities that I work in, sometimes you have more than 14 clans living together. So when you invite people to a meeting and then you say, draw a map, you know, which map, which group has the primary knowledge of the area or of the situation that you want them to map out. So just knowing that backstory to how Aboriginal people live and where they live has really determined how we develop the tools so that they suit a situation, rather than that we just apply them wholesale without any adaptation. Our researchers are community-based people that have very little education, they have very little literacy, and they have very little numeracy, but they have a very good understanding and expertise now on how to use these tools. That tells me that our way is really reaching people. And just to add to that, the Australian government was so impressed, in fact, with how ARPNet was doing research on a project that we were not the only group that was conducting a similar research. So we were able to be compared against other groups. And on the basis of that comparison, the Australian government gave us money to prepare the Dilly Bag. And also they made a video to actually show that this model of engagement, where the community is front center and of the project, is really worth pursuing, not only because of the value it brings to research and evaluation, but also because of the value it brings to the individuals on the ground. Not only are we giving them employment, but for the first time we were seeing them as more than just human GPSs. They were not just being, oh, can you show me where the leader of the community is? Can you show me where this is? We were actually saying, no, you go out and you talk to the people. And we were giving them all the authority and trust that is required in such a process. So they felt empowered again to really be active change makers within their own community. I do think that I have an easier way with the communities because they see me as one of them. And in the communities that I've been with, working for the last 15 years, you know, I've been adopted by various families, so I have very strong connections with particular groups. But I also think that it's because they think that it's more possible to engage with me where they're not being judged and where education is not a prerequisite. So they're not really, you know, because their idea of Africa is a poverty-stricken continent, which they need to help. And so initially when we're talking about IP and recognition. And I said, oh, you know, when we work together, how do you want to be recognized? And should I write papers and put your names on it? And they were like, oh no, Bev, we know you're going to help your people. So they were thinking that they were also helping me. So it has come from that sort of background where their knowledge of Africa is not as perhaps as well as it could be, but that gave them the impression that they were doing something for me as well as I was doing something for them. And that relationship has continued because it's been primarily demand driven. So they call me and say, Bev, you know, can you help? I have this problem, you know, or they will say, you know, there's too many young people dying from suicides. How can we look into this? You know, these government people are coming and they're telling us this, but, you know, how do we get our own information so that we can talk to the government in a stronger voice? And then I say, oh, you know, have you forgotten that other tool that we used before? And maybe we should use that one. And so essentially they see me as someone that is outside the system that they can relate to without being judged, I think, and that there's trust between us. And therefore they know that I haven't published anything that they didn't want me to publish, or that when we go to meetings, I put them in the front and they speak. And so it's very much demand driven. And they said to me, when we were talking about partnerships, Bev, this is like having two legs. When one leg is hurt or is walked over a sharp stone or a sharp object, that leg is not walking properly. So you're walking in a funny way. There is no balance. But when you're here, then we feel that you're fixing that leg that is broken so that we can be in balance with any outsider that comes to talk with us. So for me, that's a vindication of the approach, that it does work to engage people on a level where they demand what they want from you and you deliver what they want and not more.